Hello, Scrabble here. Today I am coming with a review for Warlock of Firetop Mountain on Nintendo Switch. Now, just to get started, you should know that back when I was a kid, I found a copy of a book in my house. It was Warlock of Firetop Mountain by Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone. The cover featured a large picture of a warlock with a dragon behind him, and I just had to know what adventure filled those pages. The book was a choose-your-own-adventure, but had a hint of a beginner's version of Dungeons & Dragons built right in, even though I wasn't familiar with Dungeons & Dragons at the time. You actively made decisions about where to go within the labyrinth of Firetop Mountain while interacting with orcs, goblins, and other adventurers. Not only was the story longer and better written than your typical choose-your-own-adventure, but rolling dice to pass skill checks and defeat monsters increased my attachment to my character and made me more invested in the quest. This was just the beginning. There were other fighting fantasy books: Death Trap Dungeon, Caverns of the Snow Witch, Crypt of the Necromancer, Preacher of Havoc. I must have ended up with most of the first 50 books in the series, and they spent decades on my bookshelves. There were so many adventures to be had, and all you needed was a book, a pencil, and a pair of dice. When I first heard of the Warlock of Firetop Mountain game coming out on the Nintendo Switch and saw screenshots that showed a mix of figurines moving around through a 3D environment and pages with illustrations right out of the book, it very quickly moved up my list as a game I needed to obtain and play as quickly as possible. The original story of Warlock of Firetop Mountain was simple and straightforward. There's a powerful warlock in the lair at the end of a maze in a mountain. The people of the nearby town of Anvil have been having a pretty awful time because of his actions. You arrive in town and head off to the mountain to solve their problems. The rest of your motivations and backstory were your own to determine. In the version on the Switch, though, it starts out the same, but now you select a character from a large roster of adventurers. They all have their own goals and backstories. The motivations are predefined, and they impact their encounters in the mountain. One of the things I had really enjoyed about the original book was that I had real stakes in the adventure. This version removed all of that for me. I no longer felt like this was my quest, but the quest of a character that I was controlling. Now, if you don't go into this with the expectation of character freedom, or previous history with the series, then this might not matter for you, or it could even be a positive. But I was not a fan of this change. Gameplay progresses by reading pages from the book, making choices from a predefined list of options, and seeing those choices reflected on the 3D environment that's created as you enter rooms and reach new areas. Occasionally you'll need to enter combat, and then the game switches to a grid-based tactical system where your figurine and the monster figurines each take a turn of either attack or movement. These combat decisions play out simultaneously, but be prepared to spend a fair amount of time attacking empty spaces. If you and an enemy attack each other at the same time, then a pair of dice are rolled to determine which of you gets the hit. This is most similar to the books, where every turn in combat is decided through basic dice rolls. I enjoyed the combat system, but it's definitely easier than the game books. The enemies have defined movement and attack patterns. If you know what those are, it's trivial to avoid getting hit every combat. The more interesting part of the gameplay is making choices in the story. Do you attack the raving lunatic, or risk trying to calm him down? Do you sneak past an enemy, or charge in sword swinging? Each character has different skills, and characters react to them differently. It is interesting to see the minor differences in your adventures. The game contains save points fairly regularly that also heal your character. You're able to resurrect 3 times in your quest and start over at the closest save point. This had the overall effect of making the game considerably easier to complete than the original book. There was a version of this game released on Steam that I haven't tried, but based on the positive reviews, I assume that it wasn't plagued by the performance issues here. The main problem is load times. When you first load the game, you're immediately treated to a loading bar. The bar moves slow. Not Monopoly Switch slow, but still pretty slow. This isn't the only instance of loading either, it just seems to get worse as you go further. Most of the loading happens on a completely static screen. You have an icon in the bottom right that doesn't move, and your cursor stays on the screen, but all the choices you selected from vanish. The first time this happened, I was sure the game had crashed because of how long the game stayed like this. Outside of load times, I was pretty satisfied with the performance of the game in docked mode. Handheld mode was another story altogether. When in handheld mode, the game increases the text size, which is great, but it becomes incredibly hard to see the beautiful models of your character moving through the environments because they become blocked by the pages of text. This really took me out of the experience, and I had a hard time getting back. Also in handheld mode, it can become difficult to select your choices. I found the buttons oddly unresponsive for some reason, and occasionally had to manually move the page up further in order for the select buttons to work at all. This is only in handheld mode, though. It does support touch, and I did find the touch controls to work better. While I was a huge fan of the fighting fantasy books growing up, I wasn't a huge fan of the Warlock of Firetop Mountain on Nintendo Switch. The aesthetics of the game were fantastic, but the performance issues really hinder the experience. There are a lot of references and Easter eggs for longtime fans of the book series, but I'm afraid they'll largely fall flat and maybe even be confusing for new players unfamiliar with the deep history of the book. If you're looking for a recommendation on a game adaptation of the fighting fantasy series, then you won't go wrong with Sorcery by Inkle. That series is based on 4 books that had an ongoing story of larger quest. Combat is done better here than in Sorcery, but I think the overall experience is better there. I'd give this game a 5 out of 10, but would score it higher if the performance issues were fixed. During my time with the game, I completed my quest twice with 2 different adventures. Warlock of Firetop Mountain is available now on the Nintendo eShop for $29.99 if you're interested. If you've enjoyed this review, go ahead and hit that like button. If you would like to see more reviews in the future from me, then go ahead and subscribe. Subscribing lets me know that you are interested in this kind of content. You could share the video or comment on it. I love talking to commenters. Thanks so much for watching. Take care. I'll see you next time.